Tonight on KQED Newsroom, the fallout for PG&E now that the company has been officially found at fault for the deadly campfire. Plus, San Francisco has become the first major city in the country to ban law enforcement from using facial recognition technology. And playoffs frenzy in the Bay Area as the Golden State Warriors and the San Jose Sharks take on their rivals in the Western Conference Finals. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We begin with more turmoil for PG&E and the political battles ahead. State fire investigators have determined PG&E's power equipment caused the campfire, the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history. PG&E had admitted months ago that was probably the case, but Wednesday's announcement removed all doubt. The finding comes as the utility is facing numerous lawsuits, a criminal investigation in Butte County, and pushback from state politicians. Also on the political front, President Trump is proposing a plan that would overhaul immigration laws, including emphasizing education and skills over family ties for those seeking entry. Here now with a look at those stories are KQED Politics correspondent Marisa Lagos, Carla Marinucci, senior writer with Politico, and Walsh, a Republican strategist with Wilson Walsh Consulting. Hello, good to see all of you guys again.
It's great to be here.
So Marisa, victims of the campfire and also consumer advocates have been insisting that PG&E be held accountable. So now we have this new finding out saying they did officially cause the fire. Will that bolster the lawsuits that have already been filed? And can we expect to see even more?
I think to your second point, yes. I think that there may be people out there who maybe did not that wanted to wait for this until they officially joined the lawsuits. I talked to Amanda Riddle. She's representing 1,800 campfire victims and thousands of others throughout Northern California related to other fires. She told me that actually the CAL FIRE report itself is not admissible in civil court. They can call CAL FIRE investigators. So does it change the calculation for them? She said not too much. PG&E said for months that they likely caused this fire. It's no big surprise. I think for her, she felt like this was sort of validating for both the victims and also just for the public to understand that this is officially the cause. But it doesn't, I don't think, change the legal strategy all that much.
And this is just, one in a slew of problems that PG&E is facing, right? It files for bankruptcy. It's facing an investigation in Butte County that could lead to manslaughter charges. It's under federal probation for the San Bruno pipeline explosion. Sean, where does the company go from here?
Well, it continues because it's a regulated utility, and bankruptcy just means reorganization. It doesn't mean it's out of money. It's not a dissolution of the company. So as long as you're a regulated utility with a PUC that guarantees rates, that money's just going to come out of the users, and it's going to go pay for all of these damages that are caused.
I mean, in fact, just a few weeks ago, they filed papers with the state regulators, the California Public Utilities Commission, asking, along with, we should say, the other major utilities in California, to increase the amount that people who issue bonds to PG&E get back. They get a guaranteed rate of return. That is how people make money off of these investor-owned utilities. Right now, our utilities in California have about a 10.25% guaranteed rate of return. That's among the highest in the nation. They want it to go up to 16%. And so I think that, Sean's point, between that, these liabilities, there are other issues, ratepayers are going to be holding the bag.
But there's also the political pressure here because ratepayers want protection. The victims of the fire want some kind of justice, which means the folks in Sacramento are going to be listening. And Gavin Newsom, the governor, has already said he wants the legislature to deal with this by July. You've got a slew of bills out there, Jerry Hill and others, looking to protect consumers here. And so I think PG&E is going to have to be watching its back on all these different fronts.
And what are the chances, do you think, that the state will come in and say, hey, we need to break you guys up, or hey, the government needs to take over parts of PG&E?
I think the bills are going to be a key here. Which ones get passed, which, how much the consumers get, what they want out of this. But I think, the pressure is on in Sacramento to be on top of this issue.
It is, but I have seen nothing that indicates that wholesale the state is going to take on breaking up this utility. I think what's been interesting is to watch how many people on Wall Street have come to Sacramento and lobbied the governor and lawmakers and kind of put the fear of God in them earlier this year. And so I think the most likely thing we'll see by the end of July is some sort of insurance fund, both potentially to help make the victims whole, but also to protect these utilities against bankruptcy and future fires.
All right, let's move on to housing, because the highest profile housing bill, one that would have changed local zoning laws to allow high density housing around transit hubs. SB 50, as it's known, it's effectively been killed for the rest of the year. Marisa, why did it not make it through the Senate Appropriations Committee?
Well, officially because the chair of that Appropriations Committee, Anthony Portantino, who's from the Pasadena area down in LA, said he didn't like it and didn't move it forward, and he has that prerogative. I mean, really the reason is because we've seen so much pushback from smaller cities, from suburban counties, the big urban mayors.
Communities.
Yes, the big urban mayors are behind this, but people in most of the state, you know, geographically do not like this. Tenants' rights groups and others who represent renters, some have also come out against it. It's a huge controversy. I think what's interesting is the fact that the president of the Senate did not force her appropriations chair to push it through.
I think you have to give State Senator Scott Wiener credit on this in the sense
of second try.
The second try in a landmark bill, and the nation was watching what was going on here. Everyone admits that housing is an issue here, the gridlock is an issue, that legislators have got to do something about it. But as Marisa said, what we saw this week was the warring factions just coming out and illustrating how tough this issue is when you have YIMBYs, the Yes in My Backyard, against neighborhood groups who say, hey, we want new housing, but not here. Right.
Except once again, though, you have a San Francisco legislator who's trying to put a San Francisco solution onto the rest of the state. And it doesn't fly well. And just as the same that you have a tension between states and the federal government, you have a huge tension between the state and local governments. And local governments do not want to give up control. And I will tell you, it wasn't just the people in Pasadena, it was Palo Alto and other places who hated it.
Yeah.
So the real issue here, Twee, is it's not trying to jam housing into neighborhoods who don't want it. What they have to fix, in my view, is if you can get a Warriors ballpark here, and you can get a football stadium by giving CEQA exemption and fee exemptions, you can do the same thing at the state level.
But not if you don't have the zoning. I mean, developers want to build, they're on board with this bill. The problem is that most places outside of these very urban areas do not want to increase density. And, some of it is about the quality of life and, the way these neighborhoods have been put out there. And I would say some of it's also about not wanting people who don't look like them in their neighborhoods. And this is a debate we've been having in California for a very long time, and we will continue to have. But I do think that the state is at a point where, given the prices and the crisis, they're going to have to figure out a way to work with the locals and come together.
And another, I have to move on because another debate that's been going on for a long time, right? Not just over housing, but immigration. Big news this week, the Trump administration is planning to overhaul the immigration system as we know it, emphasizing skills and education over family ties. Sean, Democrats oppose it, and some Republicans even oppose it because it doesn't reduce overall immigration levels, which is what the hardline conservatives want. So why is the president doing this?
Well, I would call it the Immigration Talking Point Act of 2020. So I think it's designed to allow Republican senators who are in tight races to basically adopt certain portions of the bill, and that doesn't actually solve anything.
To your point,
actually, that's a good point.
But it makes it tricky for Republicans who are running in tight races.
I don't think so, actually. And actually, the policy, if you look at the policy, I agree with a number of the policy issues. And if you want to put immigration in, we have 2.8 million housing unit shortage in the state of California. And you want to invite a bunch of folks in and with already a housing crisis. So all these issues in the public mind do get tied up together. I don't think it's comprehensive immigration reform. I don't think it's designed to do that. I don't think it's designed to have a bill. It's just designed to get past the 2020 election.
It's an interesting decision, though, from a hardline immigration president to put something out there that was basically designed by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who is a little more liberal than a lot of the people.
And had virtually no support on Capitol Hill. That was
right. I mean, Mitch McConnell.
But guys,
that's never stopped him on anything.
But Twee, you're absolutely right, because what this administration doesn't do is they don't put together working groups to put together a group and then to roll out legislation and then to kick it out. They throw something out on Twitter. It flies around a little bit, and then either poof, it's gone 3 days later, or it, marinates in the legislature or in the Congress somewhere. So
clearly, what he's putting out here is an effort to set up his 2020 presidential run agenda, playing to his base, like you said earlier, Sean. But on this broader issue of immigration, Presidents Bush and President Obama previously tried to reach a bipartisan consensus on immigration. They failed. Is there anything, Carla, at this point that he could put in there that Democrats might even partially agree with?
Absolutely. The DACA, the Dreamers, there are more of them in California than in any other state. And these are people who've been waiting for some kind of answer here. The Democrats, I think, wanted some kind of discussion on that. We got nothing. I think this is where the Trump administration could have reached out, could have made some effort, and nothing was done.
I think the question is, right, is there actually a legislative strategy? I don't know that there is. I think, to Sean's point, this is something that they can put out there that he can sort of position himself for 2020. But if you want to actually pass legislation, you build coalitions, you work with not even just Democrats, but your Republican counterparts in Congress. None of them were even in the room for this.
All right, Marisa Lagos with KQED, Carla Marinucci with Politico, and Sean Walsh with Wilson Walsh Consulting. Thank you all. This week, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors voted to ban the use of facial recognition technology by police and other city agencies. The Stop Secret Surveillance Ordinance was introduced by Aaron Peskin. He says the technology is inaccurate and invasive. Last year, the American Civil Liberties Union tested Amazon's facial recognition product and found that 28 members of Congress were incorrectly identified, mostly people of color. Supporters say the technology will help fight crime, but opponents call it an overreach. Here now to discuss this are Jennifer Lynch, Surveillance Litigation Director for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and Trisha Thadani, City Hall reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. Nice to see you both.
Thanks for having us.
Jennifer, first of all, can you explain how facial recognition works? How do you go from, for example, a camera at a subway station to having that technology identify you?
Sure. Well, so face recognition uses an algorithm to measure various aspects of your face and compare that to faces and face templates that are already in a database. And based on the percentage of similarity between your face and the face in the database, the face recognition system will identify you as a person in the database or not.
And given where we are today in society, there are cameras everywhere. So, Tricia, what would San Francisco's new ordinance do exactly?
Yeah, so there's really two aspects to this law. So the first one that Supervisor Aaron Peskin had proposed was that it would just not allow our city agencies to use facial recognition technology. So it's important to note that SFPD says that they don't currently use the technology, but this would bar them from acquiring it in the future. And then the second aspect of the law that hasn't gotten as much attention as the outright ban is that under this ordinance, our city departments will now have to disclose exactly what surveillance technology they are using. And that can be anything from license plate readers to body cameras or anything like that.
And they would also have to get approval from the Board of Supervisors, right, for future surveillance technology purchases.
Right. So first they would have to, once they disclose everything that they're using, then the Board of Supervisors can look at that. And, you know, in theory, if they don't like what they see on one of them, they can go and then prohibit them from using it in the future. And then any future technologies that they do want to acquire, you're correct, they would need to get approval.
And Jennifer, as Trish just mentioned, the San Francisco Police Department and the Sheriff's Department say they don't use facial recognition technology. So why the need for a ban at this point? Why do you support it?
Well, I think we're right at the cusp of seeing face recognition rolled out in law enforcement agencies across the country. We're already seeing it being used up in Oregon. Systems have been purchased in Detroit and Chicago and New York. So we're right at a point where we really need to sort of lay down a mark and say we're not going to allow police departments to even acquire this technology, because we shouldn't be experimenting on our citizens in the United States to see if this technology even works. We already know how it's being applied in other countries like China, and we don't want that to happen here.
And let me understand this as well, because even, let's say, for example, the San Francisco Police Department doesn't use the technology, but could they partner with a third party, like, say, Amazon, for example, to somehow still be able to have access to facial recognition?
Well, under the way the ordinance is currently written, no, they can't partner with Amazon. They can't acquire the face recognition through a third party. The only sort of loophole in the ordinance would be if they somehow received face recognition identification from another source without going out and seeking access to that.
And how accurate is this technology, Trish?
Well, that's the question, is we don't exactly know yet. Like the report that you had mentioned before, where with the ACLU had put out, where it misidentified 28 members of Congress. I mean, that obviously does bring into question, it's obviously an emerging technology, and why should we put it in the hands of our law enforcement? But then you hear the other side, where you don't really hear anyone saying this is the solution and this is the perfect thing that we should be using. But you hear people who are against the outright ban being like, well, why don't we just create a framework around how it's used, instead of just banning it altogether, because in some cases it could be a useful crime-solving tool if it's used as a supplement rather than the only thing.
I think the problem with that, though, is that we already know that face recognition doesn't perform as well on people of color and women. And so if you're talking about a criminal justice system that disproportionately impacts people of color, where our mugshot databases are made up disproportionately with African Americans, and they are targeted by law enforcement more frequently than other races and ethnicities, face recognition is going to have a disproportionate impact and will misidentify people for crimes. So I think it's a real risk.
But you have police departments like Detroit, New York, right? And they say we treat this technology with the utmost care and caution, and we do believe that we don't use just the technology itself, but there's human intervention involved to make sure that this is used properly. Does that give you comfort?
No, it really doesn't, because we know that humans misidentify people who they don't know at even higher rates than face recognition technology. So I think a lot of people think, well, if I just have an officer look at the image and verify the image after the fact, then that will sort of negate any misidentification through the technology. But that just doesn't happen. What happens is the officer identification reinforces the misidentification that occurs through the technology.
So Trish, do we know how many law enforcement agencies nationally are using this technology right now?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a definitive list, but there definitely are some examples. So Orlando, for example, has, they've used it in some capacity, I believe Dallas as well. And then one of the first law enforcement agency to use Amazon's facial recognition technology was Washington County in Oregon, and they also, their sheriff had come out with a statement saying that we don't use this as our only form of identification. We also must have a human intervention as well.
Are there cases where it has been used effectively to fight crime?
So there was one high-profile case during the terrible Capitol Gazette shooting in Maryland at a newspaper there, where police were having trouble identifying the suspect through regular means such as fingerprints. So then they were able to use a federal database to be able to match with the suspect, and then they were able to successfully apprehend the suspect in that case.
But then there have also been misidentifications. So we just had a pretty terrible misidentification in the Sri Lanka bombings, where a Brown University student was misidentified through face recognition, and then her picture was put out on social media, and she was targeted by people all around the world as being one of the bombers.
Let me ask you this. We live in a digital age where massive data breaches seem to be happening more and more, places like Facebook, for example, and other big tech companies. Yet for many people, when you talk about facial recognition, it seems to hit a nerve that's different from those scenarios, even though we're still talking about personal data here. Why do you think that's the case, Jennifer?
Well, I think face recognition is different because our faces are exposed whenever we're out in public, whenever we're talking to anybody. It's very unusual for somebody to cover up their face, and it's very difficult to change your face. So if your face ends up in a database, it's very different from having a driver's license number or a credit card number or social security number taken as part of a hack or a security breach. You can change all of those numbers, but you can't change your face.
Right, and like I think there's also more of an emotional appeal to it, and it's easier to wrap your head around the idea of your face being used in certain ways rather than like biometric data or your things that you click on in the internet. Like it's much easier to fathom the idea of having your face out there rather than other parts of yourself.
Yeah, we know that federal lawmakers are now paying attention too. There's a House Oversight Committee on this, a meeting on this next week. So thank you both for being here. Jennifer Lynch with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and also Trish Thadani with the San Francisco Chronicle. Turning now to sports, the Golden State Warriors are in the Western Conference Finals for the 5th consecutive year. This time they're facing off against the Portland Trail Blazers, who last reached the Western Conference Finals 19 years ago. The Warriors won their first 2 matches at home on Tuesday and Thursday. NBA history was also made when 2 brothers, the Warriors' Steph Curry and the Blazers' Seth Curry, faced off for the first time in a playoff. Meanwhile, another Bay Area sports franchise is vying to be best in the West. The San Jose Sharks battled it out on the ice on Wednesday, winning Game 3 against the St. Louis Blues. Joining me now is KNBR Evening Show host Mark Willard. Mark, so nice to have you here.
It is wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
What an amazing time, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that Warriors game last night. They were down by as many as 17 points, and then they rallied back to win 114 to 111. What are your takeaways from that game, and what do you think are the biggest challenges for the Blazers or any team, for that matter, to take them on?
Yeah, I mean, all 3 teams that are left in these playoffs against the Warriors have a lot less experience than them. So that's the biggest challenge, is the Warriors walk into every one of these games, and they've been there before. They've been there, done that, and this particular team, the big story that's going on with them right now is they've lost probably their most talented player in Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
And what that seems to have done is kind of galvanized the guys. They're a little bit more focused. It's a little nostalgic. They feel like the team back in 2015 and 2016, which the Bay loves more than any other team. So you're hearing a lot of fans say they might not be as good as they were, but they're a little bit more fun. They're a little bit more relatable.
Do you think Steph is also saying, hey, you thought Kevin Durant really is the key player here? Well, let me show you something.
There's a little bit of that. And the Bay has always loved Steph, but I think nationally people do question, can he be, the best player on a championship team? Because even when he was 4 years ago, he didn't win Finals MVP. And so there's always those voices out there. And this is presenting a little bit of an opportunity for him, for sure.
Well, you live and breathe sports, right? You host a 3-hour show every day.
Yes.
My goodness. How exciting is this for you, though? Both the Warriors and the Sharks in the playoffs. What would you compare it to?
No, it's great, and especially because, during my show, which is in the evenings, this is during the games a lot, so we have a lot of fluid stuff going on that's really exciting and kind of fun. And
flying by the seat of your pants.
Absolutely, which is a whole lot of fun. So, having 2 teams in this chase at the same time, I think for any city and any group of fans is a lot of fun. You get these updates, you're at one of the games, you see the scores posted on the others, and 49ers players are all going to the Sharks games, and so it's a real communal feel. But separately, the 2 teams, I mean, it couldn't be more different. The Warriors are doing this for the 5th year in a row, and the Sharks have never done it. I mean, for Sharks fans, it's almost like, I would compare it to maybe you're about to have the birth of your first child, but you don't know what the sex is. You know what I mean? Like, they're just sitting there kind of thinking about what will this be like if it happens and all of that.
Can we just touch the cup?
Yes. Can we just?
Stanley?
And is it, they've teased their fans so many times. So it's like, is this finally the year? And they're having some breaks go their way. They're getting some officials calls that have dropped their way. And so it's fun. It's fun. But it's nerve-wracking, though.
It is.
Yeah.
I have to ask you this because you brought up Kevin Durant. He hasn't played in recent games due to an injury. He's going to be a free agent soon. There's some talk about whether he's coming back to the game after the season concludes. What do you think he'll do?
I think he's going to go.
You think so?
I do. The whispers are pretty loud and have been for a while, and everyone's got their thoughts on why that may be. We talked about how beloved Steph is here, and so some people feel like Kevin, as good as he is, maybe the best player in the world, doesn't even really have his own team.
Where do you think he'll go?
The big rumors are New York. He moved a business out there already earlier in this season, and they've got room to maybe bring him and another star in. Some say maybe Kyrie Irving, who's with the Celtics right now. The Clippers are maybe an outside possibility, and that would be interesting if he stays on a team that the Warriors will see a lot. And in the playoffs, I still think there's an outside chance that he stays, and maybe he hasn't fully made his decision, but the odds-on favorite is that he plays elsewhere, and so maybe we're getting a little preview of what that'll look like right now.
All right, let's move on to the Sharks. They've been to the playoffs 14 of the last 15 seasons, right? And yet have never won, like you said. Do you see them getting over the hump finally this year?
It feels like there's something bigger at work. So maybe. I don't know if they're the most talented team out there. The team that's in the Eastern Conference, Boston, has already quickly dispatched of their opponent, and they're in the Stanley Cup final now, waiting for an opponent. So they're going to be well rested, and they're very talented, but it's hockey, and so there's always the way the puck bounces, there's some breaks that have to fall your way, and they've been getting those. So
is this year different from the other years, do you think, and in what way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in years past, they've been the most talented team, and maybe have carried that thought in there, like there's expectation. We're supposed to do this. That carries a lot of pressure. This team immediately fell down 3-1 against Vegas in the very first round, and everyone said another year that's going to be a missed opportunity. And then since then, it's just like magic has struck. And
get some wind in
yeah,
there.
Yeah, and that helps. That goes a long way.
So, it's going, San Jose has advanced in both rounds of the NHL playoffs by surviving consecutive Game 7s,
Yes.
right? So would you say going long is an advantage or a disadvantage?
There's an age-old conversation in sports of rest versus rust. And like when you get through a quick series, you get to rest. But you can also fall out of sync a little bit. So what the Sharks have got going right now is a really good rhythm. It's pretty much every other night you go play a hockey game. The downside of that is, especially in this sport that's so physical, I mean, it takes a toll. It is a really, really difficult run to play what I guess potentially 28 hockey games just in the playoff run.
If you're ever in the Shark Tank, I mean, I've seen some of those games. I mean, it's brutal.
It's
I mean,
brutal.
the way they
And so,
play, it's a tough sport.
Yeah, physically and then therefore mentally, the longer it goes, it's tough. But again, every time you get one of those magical wins, then adrenaline just takes over, and so you're able to kind of get through that physical challenge.
Let's talk about longtime Shark Joe Thornton. He's well beloved in this market, and he's headed straight to the Hall of Fame after he retires. He's never won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Is this his last chance?
I mean, it's probably his last really good chance. I mean, they're that close now. They're they just only need a handful more wins, and that's definitely one. There's a few kind of stories that are riding below the surface of simply the Sharks winning, and that's a big one. I mean, he's not the central focus of their team anymore, but he is, from 10,000 feet, the hockey fan knows that this is a guy who deserves this.
He's a legend.
Absolutely, and it's such a big deal in hockey. I mean, there's championships in every sport, but in hockey, it's about that name being on the cup, and therefore it's there forever. And he's one of those guys who deserves it. So that would be one of the really great stories if it happens.
That would be great. Mark Willard, host of the KNBR Evening Show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely. It was fun.
All right, that will do it for us. As always, you can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.